Well, Mike, thank you for agreeing to meet with us and have a chat. You've got quite an adventure as to how you arrived at Otago to get to this point. So welcome. I hope you're enjoying your time in Dunedin so far. I've got a list of questions, a mile long. We've got some very good research elves. But I thought maybe let's start by asking one question that has been on my mind as I've been in the university libraries lots of times. How good are staff and how good are students at returning their library books on time?
That's quite a narrow question, but yeah, I understand why you're asking. My understanding so far is pretty good. I think this is something across the globe that university libraries are getting less concerned about now than they have been in the past, and that's partly through the expansion of digital provision, and actually that changes the approach for many students. So yeah, I have to say that's not a question that many people have raised with me so far, either inside the library from students or outside inside the library with library staff or outside the library with students. So I don't think it's a big issue for us or the university.
Excellent. Well, I noticed with some sort of horror that as I went to get a book from the library myself recently, I thought, I don't know how to get a book out anymore because everything has changed so much since I first used the library here. Yeah. So can we get into your story of how you arrived here in New Zealand? You hail from the UK originally?
That's correct. Yeah, I lived all my life in the UK until the end of January this year. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reason I applied for the job at Otago was, I suppose, twofold. One was career aspiration to become a university librarian following working at the University of Bristol for many years, and then more recently at the University of Durham, in both locations as deputy university librarian. So partly it was a career aspiration, and partly wife and I came to New Zealand for a holiday, extended holiday, 5 weeks back in 2018, the end of the year. And that was driven because our eldest son has been in New Zealand, actually been here now 7 years. So that was our first visit to the country, and we just loved the country. We felt a real affinity with the country, and it was later in 2019, towards the end of 2019, that the Otago job was advertised, and I had a good conversation with the recruitment company about the role and the university and the city, and it lined up in a lot of ways. So research intensive university with a great reputation for research and for education, a long established university with a great reputation, but also a relatively small city. And that was one of the more challenging aspects of finding a role that I felt would suit me, was finding a university in a small city.
I think too, there's a nice connection. You know, Dunedin and Durham, they're both very much university cities, where the university is the focus of the city. So to some extent, while it's you can't get much further away from Durham than Dunedin, it's probably been quite useful in making you feel reasonably at home here quite quickly.
In fact, I couldn't have gone to a university further away in the whole world, and
yeah, without coming back home again.
Yeah.
Your undergraduate studies, you majored in sports science, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I did a 3-year undergraduate honours degree in sports science back in the 1980s, when it really wasn't very common at all. It was a relatively small number of institutions did sports science, and it really just aligned two of my passions, really, I suppose, and felt I'd have a really good academic 3 years studying sports science, and I did. It was a really good program.
So can you talk us through the bridge between your sports science and becoming a university librarian? That's an interesting combination.
The starting point really was doing my final year dissertation, and realizing the library at the institution I was at wasn't going to meet the needs that I had for the information resources. So I, over the summer between the second and third year, I went to a couple of university libraries, in Birmingham and in Loughborough, who had very strong services and collections for sports science. And I just realised what a difference a really good library makes to an academic career, whether it's as an undergraduate or beyond. So that sort of set my mind thinking about future directions. So while there's no particular connection between sports science and working in libraries, I honestly believe that any degree sets you up for a very wide range of future work. So it's all about, what you learn as a person and what you learn sort of in analytical skills, interpersonal skills, and those generic skills that actually set you up for any role. So it was really the idea that I could make a difference to the education and research opportunities within higher education through being part of a library service.
Yeah. So your career so far has seen you in leadership roles in libraries for a number of years now. What was it that sort of drove you into leadership? Or do you have a particular inspiration that led you into a leadership role?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was in a way quite a slow burner as a professional. Academically, I probably didn't put as much effort in as I could have done. I was too busy playing sport, if I'm absolutely honest. So I didn't have particular goals right from the start of my academic career. And before working in universities, I'd worked in a hospital library and public library for a while. So I had some different experiences. And then moving to the University of Bristol, I suppose I started to feel, okay, there's a real career here, and a role that I had managing a relatively small branch and education library with around 10 staff was my first real leadership experience, on a relatively small scale. But it was actually the contact with senior staff within the university who sort of set my aspirations a bit higher and gave me the confidence that actually I could progress a career. But even so, I didn't really have a particular plan. I was very focused on family and staying local, so I didn't move institutions to gain experience that way. But through talking with senior colleagues and taking opportunities to do lots of different things within the university library, that led me to develop a wide range of skills and knowledge across library services. So I did things related to university library-wide staff development, to digital literacy, information literacy, training, sort of supporting academic librarians to teach within their faculty programs, but also a wide range of things relating to areas not directly for my role. So things like disaster planning for libraries. I had no experience in that, but I was just given a task to develop a program and a policy. So it's through that wide range of experiences that I started to develop informal leadership.
Good. I'd like to know a bit more about your thoughts on leadership in general. What makes a good leader, particularly in an academic field such as the university?
I mean, I'm a strong believer in personal qualities and qualities that really allow teams to flourish without having to continually ask permission to develop ideas and to take initiative. So I'm very much a collaborative, open leader who expects a lot of staff, but also gives a lot back and gives opportunities for staff to take initiative and develop their own ideas within a strong framework of the direction of travel, which should, in my view, be developed with a wide range of library staff and partners outside the library, whether they're academic departments or professional services, or indeed people from outside the university for whom we provide services.
Yeah. You said two of my favorite words when it comes to leadership. You hinted at enabling and flourishing. It was very nice to hear. Thank you. Can we come to your transition from Durham University to Otago? Tell us a little bit about the year that took. It took an awfully long time, obviously no fault of your own, but can you talk us through that story, please?
Yeah, so I mean, in fact, it was really almost 18 months from expressing interest in the post and talking with recruitment company, and then having Zoom interviews, and then being invited out for interview in the end of February 2020. So there was quite a lot of waiting before I got to interview. Obviously, the academic year in the UK runs from September around to June, whereas in New Zealand, that period is around Christmas, and after Christmas was the summer, so there was a bit of a lull in the recruitment activity. But I came for interview and brought Wendy, my wife, to New Zealand so she could experience Dunedin as a city and location where we were obviously considering moving. So I had a 4-day recruitment interview process on site, which was slightly daunting to start with. But once I got into the process and understood what it was about, it was really a two-way process. So an opportunity for me to talk with academic and library colleagues, senior university leaders, and for the university to find a bit more about me. So that process was really interesting and gave me a good basis under which to make the decision about when I was offered the job, would this be the right one for me? I
like what you said there about it being a very much a two-way mutual process. So maybe feel free not to answer this question, but when you got to that stage in your interview process where you were asked, have you got any questions for us? What were you keen to find out?
I mean, by the time I got to the interview, there were not many more questions left to ask, if I'm honest, because I'd asked so many, ranging from, what's it like working in the university? What's the culture in the university? What's the direction of travel for that culture? What's Dunedin like as a city? So I'd done a lot of those questions about fit. How do people feel about living in Dunedin? Probably the most southern university in the globe. That distance from other universities, which is obviously a feature of New Zealand, but also that sense of where is the university going. And I really liked the concept of moving away from a UK style university to one that really is around a university that's serving New Zealand population as a whole, but also the wider Pacific region. And I think for me that was a really exciting aspect of the university's direction.
Yeah, I'm struck by what you said about, I think there's a phrase in a famous New Zealand song about the tyranny of distance that New Zealand often experiences. And arguably, Otago being the world's southernmost university experiences it more acutely than others. Have you felt any of the tyranny of distance or isolation or being disconnected from the world?
I haven't yet. The experiences that I had at the University of Durham, which felt remote from much of the rest of the UK, not really geographically, because it's, not too far. You can get down to London within 5 hours easily. But more, it was a cultural difference and cultural isolation in the northeast of England. So I was sort of prepared for that type of experience. So I'm very much aware of the variation in view that from the North Island, from Auckland, that Dunedin is always freezing cold, and that sort of sense of remoteness. But I'm not feeling that myself.
Yeah, excellent. So as you were appointed, and you and your family were moving to New Zealand, and then COVID hit, and that threw an enormous spanner in the works. Can you tell us about your experience with either what was it like having to wait so much time, and then arriving in New Zealand and MIQ? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so that from being offered the job and accepting the job in principle right at the beginning of March last year, I made the conscious decision not to resign from my my post at Durham until I'd got a visa, and that was Otago were happy with that approach. So it was, you know, coming back to the UK, really COVID was just in the margins. So in Europe, there were a lot of concern about Italy or areas within Italy, and obviously within China globally. But there was really no indication of what was to come. So we started immediately on getting our visa applications progressed. But actually the day we completed our visa applications was the day that New Zealand closed its borders. So from that point, we had this real uncertainty. I think if I'm honest, I didn't expect a delay beyond a couple of months, you know, so I would have expected a 3-month notice period. So, you know, I thought, oh, it's probably going to take 4 months from being invited for the post to arriving. I thought, okay, delay maybe another month or two. That's not too bad. It means I'll have a slightly longer summer in the UK before coming over to New Zealand and coming to the spring. But it got to probably August 2020, and really there was no sign of things changing. And I had a really good conversation with the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, Pat Cragg, just about what were the next steps. I think Pat was concerned that I was going to turn around and say, I'm not prepared to wait. I was slightly concerned that the university were going to say, we're not prepared to wait, and we'd end up parting ways, but neither of us were taking that approach. So we had a period where the university was able to make a case to immigration for me to have an exemption. The first application was refused, but the second application that was put in August, late August, was accepted. And this was probably late October. And then it was a case of reapplying for a different visa, which we did very quickly, turned that around in about 24 hours. And then a month, I think a bit less than a month, the visa application was approved. So we could then apply for MIQ places for Wendy and I. And from that point in early December, it was, you know, all systems go, selling the house, preparing to move. And the MIQ places were available at towards the end of January, 26th of January. So we had flights booked and everything sorted. It was a really concerning Christmas, actually, from having thought everything's done to seeing countries closing. So our flight was through Singapore, and they effectively closed their borders to the UK. But the recruitment team at Otago were fantastic, actually, in just taking all that pressure off us and saying, we'll sort it all out. So in the end, we had to take a test, COVID test, within 72 hours of flying, which we managed to do, got a negative test, travelled down to London for the flight. We had to stay on the plane in Singapore, we couldn't get off. So it was actually turned out fine. It was an hour on the plane. It meant we didn't have to wander around a massive airport. And then arrived in New Zealand, whisked into the CBD in Auckland, into a great hotel, Four Seasons in the CBD, thinking we'd have a relaxing fortnight before flying down to Dunedin.
It wasn't quite a relaxing fortnight, though, was it?
No, it wasn't. I got really stressed by not having nice coffee for a while, and then that paled into insignificance once my wife tested positive for COVID on our 7th day in New Zealand, which was such a surprise because we'd been so careful in the UK. We'd not been into a supermarket since March 2020. And, you know, we signed a contract for selling our house on the street. We didn't go into the solicitor's premises. We were under umbrellas in the pouring rain, signing our contracts. So we'd done everything to avoid any COVID contact. But somehow Wendy contracted. It may have been at the airport in the UK, it may have been on the plane. We don't know. So we were then moved from hotel in the CBD in Auckland to Jet Park, where we were really uncertain what would happen next. I had, I think, probably 10 negative COVID tests on arriving in New Zealand before we decided that I would separate from Wendy in the hotel as a way of trying to speed up our combined discharge. Yeah. In the end, that didn't work, as my 11th COVID test was positive. So I then had to wait until I was symptom-free for 3 days. So yeah, it was an intriguing and frustrating, but looking back on it, we got away lightly, really. If you just think about how devastating COVID has been on people's health across the globe. And, you know, we had 4 days of each 4 days feeling really unwell, but being well looked after and knowing what was coming for us, which was settling into Dunedin.
It's a really interesting story, that it just seems like almost a year of hurdle after hurdle for you both. So I expect that when you finally did arrive here in Dunedin, there was, you know, quite a sense of relief. Can we maybe move on and talk more about your role as the university librarian now here at Otago? We're very proud at Otago of the experience our students have. You know, we're very much a student-centered university. It's a student town, if you like. Part of that is pursuing academic excellence, as well as social and cultural and sporting activities, you know, the whole round person. How do you think the university libraries contribute to the students' experience?
That's a really good question. I think the role of the library should be around uplifting students' academic aspirations and just exposing them to not just the content and the skills that they need to develop, but also allowing them to go into areas of the academic disciplines that aren't necessarily directly related to the course that they're doing. So making connections in different academic disciplines, experiencing not just the academic, pure academic side, but if we think about the Hocken collections and the exhibitions and the cultural materials that they can experience through that, a very different type of environment at the Hocken collections. So it's really trying to provide that breadth of academic information, knowledge, experience, the cultural knowledge and experience that can be obtained through materials, whether they're in print, whether they're digital, delivered in different ways, but also enabling students to feel really safe and comfortable in their learning environment. So having physical spaces that are suitable to the whole range of academic requirements and individual requirements. So for students to be able to bury themselves and isolate themselves for a period of time so they can get their head down, do that really serious study, but also have the opportunity to be in spaces where they're surrounded by friends or others who are working hard, but also to be able to engage with other students, whether it's group work or studying in preparation for assignments or examinations or presentations, and have that range of facilities that enables them to do that whole wide range of academic work.
I do know what you're saying about the libraries having a very important role in sort of collaboration and cooperation, between students and also, with academic staff as well. Every time I go into the libraries, I'm so impressed at how it just feels warm and inviting, and people want to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think on probably within my first couple of weeks, I walked around the library with Helen Nicholson, who was at that point my line manager as Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, although now she's acting University Librarian. And we just walked around the library. This was in early March this year, so relatively early on in the semester. And that was the experience we both felt, was just that impression of how busy the library was, how many students were there, but actually the variety of study that students were undertaking and the commitment that they have to their study. I think that's a distinctive feature of research universities.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is why I so much love working in research universities.
Yeah. Well, I've got a challenging question for you now. My research elf has given me the library's strategic directions to 2022 document. And here's a quotation from it. It says, "It's more important than ever that the library engages proactively in rethinking its role in the digital era and the way it delivers services to the university's communities." So how do you see some challenges or opportunities or both in research and teaching in a digital and a COVID and post-COVID era?
I mean, it is really interesting reflecting on documents that were written pre-COVID, and actually this is one document that sort of doesn't exactly foresee the future, but the future it foresaw was absolutely relevant to a COVID and post-COVID world. So that transition to or from a reliance on the physical to a combined reliance on the print and the physical, the print and the digital. So, you know, libraries across the globe during the COVID period transformed their services to meet the off-campus experiences. And some of those are absolutely going to continue. So being able to deliver services in a digital way is an absolute prerequisite for the future environment. And that works both in a physical campus as well as a COVID constrained world. So the challenges around that are actually many. There's some technological challenges around ensuring that we have systems that can deliver the content in the formats that students and academic needs, but also that it has the resilience to be there in the long term, so that we're not putting up information that is going to be difficult to find in the future, or we're not going to preserve in the future. So examples of using digital objects, whether they're images from photographs, images of paintings, of art, images of archival material, or whether they're sound recordings or videos. We need to ensure that where we should be keeping those for the long term, that we've got systems that will allow us to do that digital preservation. And that's a big challenge across the globe, not just at Otago. But I think there's also the challenge of providing content from publishers, and that's has been a challenge for the whole of my library career over 30 years, particularly over the last 20 years, when publishers have charged increasing prices every year. So the inflation on information resources has been in double digits for many years. I think in probably the last 5 years, that's come down to slightly lower levels, but it's still unsustainable for universities to be able to afford all of the digital content that we need to provide for research and education with inflation that's above the level of general inflation. So there's a lot of work going on globally around how we can work with publishers to reduce the cost of information resources, but also within universities and libraries in particular, to explore different ways of delivering that content. So whether that's making publications open access, so that there's no cost for the reader or the university to pay for the subscription. There might be a cost for publishing, but if that can be managed in a better way, then that reduces the overall cost to universities of that content. But there are also interesting experiments going on, one starting in New Zealand around open access textbooks. But this is happening globally as well. So the states, the education department in the States are providing $7 million a year to organizations that want to provide open access textbooks and developing those. So there's lots of potential developments happening, but we need to see some practical actual examples that will be useful for academics and useful for students in the future.
Thank you. I know too, a lot of my students and a lot of academic staff across the university just feel so well supported over the past through the whole COVID era and moving a lot of learning online, and that couldn't have been done without the support of the libraries and all their staff. So thank you for that. Can I ask a question now about alumni? Can you tell us about what Otago library services are available to alumni students after they graduate?
So the students who are based in Dunedin can still use the physical building, and there is some digital content that they can use if they're physically on the premises. So our licenses, some of our licenses allow what's called walk-in users. We are starting to explore what that might look like in Christchurch and in Wellington and in Invercargill and indeed in Auckland for premises that the university has on those sites, and want to explore whether that walk-in use can be available for alumni as well. We also want to explore and understand actually from alumni what, in a bit more detail, what would be useful for them. So there are some options within licenses for digital content that we could take up if there was demand from alumni for that. One of the other aspects is pointing alumni to free content, so this open access content, and I think that's a good starting point actually for the university to be thinking about why would we make content available in open access format. The advantage of that, it gives access to everybody, so not just those in academic institutions.
Wonderful, thank you. So I've got two more questions left. This one I'm quite keen on, because I'm very interested in what is sort of our graduate profile of the students as they leave us. So from your perspective, what's your wish for our graduating students as they go off into the world as our alumni?
From I suppose a broader perspective than the library, I think it's having students who are curious and interested and have got experience of not just academic, develop their own academic development, but have had opportunities to do things outside academia as well. So learning skills through volunteering or work experience, whether that's paid internships or volunteering. I think that rounded sense of an individual who can contribute to New Zealand and in particular as a country, not just economically, but in terms of being a good citizen. And I think a library can play a role in that, in terms of allowing students to develop skills to interrogate information, to in this world of fake news, to be able to understand how to evaluate information that's presented in most increasingly complex information world. So having those skills to be able to interrogate that landscape of and the torrent of information that's available, and developing that both curiosity, but also the ability to analyze what is credible information.
Well said, couldn't agree more. Finally, last question. We haven't talked much about books. In fact, we haven't talked about any particular book, but what are you reading at the moment?
It's a good question. I've just finished a fiction book by David Nichols. I'm absolutely terrible at remembering what I've read. So I'm not the typical librarian in that perspective. So I picked up a book that I thought I'd read from Margaret Atwood, but realised by halfway through the first page that I had actually read it before. So I picked up a book of world history, which was, in one sense, quite a good bedtime reading because it sent me to sleep pretty quickly. But did give me an opportunity briefly to see actually what was this book saying about New Zealand in pre-European, and I think it made me realise just how one-sided most history books are, written from a certain perspective, and how much more we have to do to understand the longer history of New Zealand, of Aotearoa,
Yeah. So that's an example of you like interrogating the text and looking for the truth beyond what was actually just there printed. So yeah, living up to your own graduate profile. Yeah. Generally, do you have a favorite author?
No, I wouldn't say that I do. I tend to read more non-fiction than fiction. I still will read pretty much anything about cricket in particular, which is my favourite sport. Although I'm very conscious that, well, I suppose this is a good time to be talking cricket in New Zealand with just being the world champions, deservedly so. Yeah.
Well, very diplomatic of you, Mike, to say you don't have one favourite author. That's probably very apt for a librarian. Well, that brings me, we're at the end now of our talk. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're very, very busy, but thank you for taking the time out of your day to have a bit of a chat. And I look forward to meeting you in person sometime. I might actually cruise around the library and see if I can find you.
Yeah, please do. It's really good to meet you, Iain.
Excellent. Cheers, Mike.
Bye.
Good.